Case Western Reserve University's Institute for the Science of Origins proudly presents the Origin Science Scholars Program. The Institute advances the scientific understanding and application of origins and evolution of human and natural systems. The Origin Science Scholars Lectures are presented with the assistance of Case Western Reserve University's Siegel Lifelong Learning Program, College of Arts and Sciences, and Media Vision. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Kingman Stroll, who is Professor of Medicine, Physiology, and Biophysics at Case Western Reserve University and is affiliated with multiple hospitals in the area, including Louis Stokes Cleveland Veterans Affairs Medical Center and University Hospitals. Dr. Stroll is a pulmonologist interested in the physiology of sleep and in sleep-disordered breathing. And it's my pleasure to welcome him to tell us about sleep and the evolution of circadian rhythm. Dr. Stroll.
So 3 weeks ago, you had a presentation on genetics and how circadian rhythm is determined by genes. And last week, you had a good friend of mine, Dr. Turek, talk a bit about his animal work in circadian rhythm and health. And this week, I want to present the ideas that come from that in terms of 3 areas. One is circadian rhythm and sleep. The other is circadian sleep and sleep disorders. And the third is circadian or sleep life. That is, how do we actually work in this? And we want to put circadian biology to sleep. So that's what we want to do today. So you talked about circadian rhythm and the origins, genetic origins of come many billions of years ago and developed into the flora and then the fauna that we have today. And in this particular instance, what you see is that there is a tree that develops into fruit flies, in which Drosophila was the first fruit fly in which the purr gene and the clock gene were found, and then there are mammals. You have this interacting gene complex that cycles in and out, determines a about 24-hour cycle of biological activity. And this activity plays out through the brain and into the rest of the body. All these genes are in all your cells, but how they are organized, directed through to talk to each other are both by nerves and as well as by hormones. And so what could go wrong? Lots of various things. And what could go right? So sleep in this schema here probably came out about between 500 and 250 million years ago and developed as a state. Now there are circadian genes in plants, but we can't detect whether they sleep. So we think, and what we're left with is the existing animals that are there, looking back into their genes, knowing the tree, and there are 2 distinct states of sleep, non-REM and REM sleep, and they came out in this period. So as definitions, if you were going to look at someone and you tried to define it without using brain waves, without using sort of things, you do it behaviorally. You say that the most relevant to biology in comparing all these different species is sustained immobility or quiescence. But dolphins, seals, and whales move. A characteristic posture, but horses and elephants sleep while standing. And reduced responsivity to external stimuli. Now the importance of that is it's not anesthesia. You immediately awaken and are able to respond to people. Maybe not perfectly, but at least you're able to restore your alertness to a degree that's remarkable, restore your memory to a degree that's remarkable in terms of the amount of time you're asleep, and be able to do that without, unlike anesthesia, unlike that sort of state. Now the brain waves, and this is important to look at, occur, and this is the last time I'm really going to talk about these different brain waves that you go into sleep, and in this particular person, it's a Western person going to sleep around 11, waking up around 7, goes through a characteristic sequence of going from wakefulness to stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4 sleep, in which they go into deeper sleep. They come back out of that, and then cycle back and forth of 3 or 4 cycles like this that is interrupted at the end of this cycle by rapid eye movement sleep or REM sleep. Now these different states are characterized by different types of brain waves, and we can measure electrophysiologically sleep. It was discovered, REM sleep was discovered in 1953. Non-REM sleep was sort of believed to be true earlier on, but it was not really a distinct state. Now, iguana, pigeons, and dolphins sleep at one side of their brain at a time. I'm just going to reinforce that, the purpose then of non-REM and REM sleep. Non-REM sleep, we think, is a restorative state. That is, it allows your brain connectivity to sort of improve from what happens during the day. As you are learning, right now you're learning, your synapses are firing, your proteins are forming memories, and they are going pretty actively. And by doing that, they're also making mistakes. They're also pruning various ideas back and forth. And what happens in slow wave sleep is you probably get rid of the cellular garbage. That's why you feel refreshed. Your cells really don't get rid of the excess proteins that are degraded and extruded from the cells when you're awake. It does more efficiently when you're in non-REM sleep. And REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement sleep, is a particular time where you consolidate memories, and some say it's even when you reset your personality, which is an interesting idea. Oh, I see what I did. Oh, the concept I want to put here is mean sleep time, because it's going to be something that continues through. Mean sleep time is the general middle of your sleep period. And it's really the time you generally go to sleep and the time you generally wake up. Not yesterday, but over the last 3, 4, 5 weeks. And that mean sleep time has a particular importance in biology, in circadian rhythm, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So we talked a little bit about immobility, and we talked about the idea that most sleep with their eyes closed, but not at all. Several species sleep with only one side of their brain. And the iguanas are a model which they sleep on one side of their brain only when they're exposed to prey. So if you put them in 2 plastic boxes, you put the iguanas on one side and a snake on the other side, they'll line up, and the wake side will be towards the snake, and their sleep side will be away from the snake. And when their sleep is satisfied on that side, they'll turn around and do the opposite thing until their sleep is satisfied. If you take away the snake, both sides of the brain sleep. So we really don't understand that very, very well, and there have been a lot of work done to try to make that happen in humans, because if it could be, then that sort of alertness would be a way of, obviously for sustained operations, it would be a way of, quote, getting efficiency if your whole purpose is to not sleep all the time. So let's get into this sort of sleep and circadian rhythm. On the side here to your left is 7 days of a person in which they have activity profiles, which are those black spikes, and inactivity profile, which are in blue. And this is when there's immobility, there's really a poor responsivity to external stimuli. This is when this person is asleep. And you can see that this particular period here is pretty regular. It varies, but it's pretty regular. It's characteristic because the mean and preferred sleep time is in this nighttime hours. And this mid-sleep time is right there in the middle. Now, it maps onto your body metabolism, which is determined by your circadian rhythm, by your suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's determined by the genes and the light and the activity in this central pacemaker. And this central pacemaker, as you learn, has lots of genes involved, and one of them is PER gene. That's the period gene. And we'll come to that a little bit later as to what the impact is on humans. But these give you a trait, that is mean sleep time, and now it gives you a gene, and now it gives you something to sort of track different people, track different cultures, track different changes that occur in our circadian rhythm. If we go throughout the day, there are two major processes that are competing here. One is called sleep, and one is called the circadian alerting signal. In the top is the sleep, what they call homeostatic. That is, the longer you've been away from sleep, the sleepier you are. Your brain really has this need to sleep. And on the bottom are changes that occur because of your suprachiasmatic nucleus and your circadian changes in temperature that change your alertness. And so in this particular example, if you're waking up at 9 o'clock in the morning, your circadian alertness is not very good, and that may be why you feel not as bright. But your sleep need is down, so you're awake, and you proceed throughout the day. And as you proceed throughout the day, there occurs then these competing forces, the alerting forces and the I'm going to make you sleep force. And this force peaks somewhere around noon and then has a little dip because your circadian rhythm doesn't really go up as quickly as your sleep need is. And that's that afternoon dip. A lot of people sit there and say, oh, I ate lunch and I feel sleepy after lunch. Well, that's true. If you eat, you feel sleepier because your temperature goes up, but also because of circadian rhythm. And if you have not slept very well the night before, that evening dip that afternoon dip even becomes more. So this circadian alertness goes up until almost in healthy middle-aged or healthy people, younger people, up until about 11 o'clock at night and then falls. And when it falls, your sleep need is there, and that's when you have your major sleep period. And you discharge your need for sleep, and then your circadian rhythm and your sleep reorganizes itself again. So then you start the next day. Now the important thing is that you have this mid-sleep time again. And you can see that this mid-sleep time is in your descending phase of your alertness, and it's also in this descending phase of your circadian signal. So what happens if you don't sleep at all? Well, this experiment's been done. These are healthy human subjects, 22 to 30 years old, who are kept awake, who are allowed to nap or sleep whenever they want for 88 hours. So the dark line down, and this is reaction time. This is they're shown a light, and this light then you react to, and you have how many milliseconds you react to, and what happens is that you're stable if you're allowed to sleep, but you're unstable when you're not allowed to sleep. In fact, but there still is a rhythm there. What is that rhythm? It's circadian rhythm. So the first thing that sort of starts it out is you can see between 16 and 18 hours after your sleep onset and you don't sleep, you will start to have decrements in your reaction time. And you'll not only have errors of omission, you'll have errors of commission. That is, the errors of omission is you'll forget to push the button. The errors of commission is you'll push the button without even having a signal. So there's a distribution of sleep. There's owls and there's larks. This owls and larks you can shift your ability to prefer your sleep time and prefer your activity. And when you do that, this is a distribution of owlness and larkness. And this is over a series of of people from age 11 to age 80. You see that men become have more owlness early on in life, and women have less owlness and more larkness in that age group. So we're going to take a break at this particular point and take some questions about owlness, larkness, and how sleep comes out of circadian rhythm before we go on to genes and other issues.
Is there an evolutionary advantage to being an owl early in life and a lark later in life?
We don't know if that's the case, and you can see that this would be a more modern human culture because lifespan usually didn't go beyond 46. What we think is that could be happening, and we'll go on to show some of the cultures that are happening, is that especially the young men start to become the watchers of the night and the protective. You can't have everybody asleep at the same time. And so there's a distribution along the culture.
Back in the 1950s when Schedule II stimulants were readily available with military pilots and college students skip sleep on a regular basis. How does that comport with what you're describing?
Well, it also had side effects in which they had dependence as well as paranoia, and those particular goals of humans to have a drug that replaces sleep persist to even today. There'll be 3 new drugs coming out in the next 24 months.
What's the y-axis on the lower graph?
The y-axis on the lower graph is called mid-sleep time. So that's the period of time in the mid-sleep, and the higher it is,
That is how many hours after you fell asleep? Is that what it is? Or
it's your mid-sleep time. You take when you go to sleep and when you wake up, and it's the mid-sleep time because that's easy to measure as a trait. And then the later that is, you're more owlness, and the earlier that is, it's more larkness.
it's the chronologic time. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay.
It's a way of comparing lots of different cultures.
Is body temperature the driver of these circadian rhythms, or is it just an indicator?
It's a marker of circadian rhythm. And you can imagine that this driver is a central hypothalamic driver, but your other rhythms occur in your heart and your liver and your spleen and your kidneys. And so this is like an orchestra, and whether it's like the Cleveland Orchestra or the Duke Ellington Orchestra, we don't know.
Sleep time, 5 hours means those people sleep 10 hours?
Mid-sleep time? No, most of the time they'll sleep a usual period of time, and we'll go on to say when do you sleep can vary, but it's their preferred sleep time. So a night owl would go to sleep at 2 and wake up at 10, and an early bird would go to sleep at 9 and wake up at 3, right? And both of them might be distressed. We'll talk about those.
So do people who work at nights and have to sleep during the day, do they just reverse their circadian rhythm?
They have a hard time adjusting. And you can imagine, because if your circadian rhythm is orchestrating all these different functions, that they either have to chronically adjust or they feel sick. And about 20% have chronic illnesses that are out of regulation because of their shift work, their chronic shift work.
Thank you for joining us. You've been watching Dr. Kingman Stroll discussing the connection between circadian rhythm and sleep. For more information on the Origin Science Scholars Program, please visit the Institute's website at origins.case.edu. In the next part of the talk, Dr. Stroll will discuss health disorders relating to circadian rhythm and sleep. Now, back to the talk.
This owlness and larkness, I want to just sort of talk a little bit about the genetic foundations for a second and be able to sort of show you that this PER gene, in this instance, this PER gene is an old gene, and it has duplications across evolution. It's not essential for the clock, but if you have certain polymorphisms in this PER gene, you change your mid-sleep time. So that if you have a 5-5, so 23andMe, they'll give you a 5-5 permutation of the per gene, you're more likely to be a person that goes to sleep earlier and wakes up earlier, as opposed to having these two other genes. This is where we're going to be in probably 5 years in terms of your genotype, and that is our ability to sort of say, what's your tendency from your genes to be able to do that? Now, these particular genes map to preferences within not only the United States, but in other parts of the world as well. PER is not the only one, and so if you take that distribution of people, you take that mean sleep time as a trait, and you look at that trait according to the entire genome, and you link different parts of the genome to that trait, you find not only is PER a factor, but you have these other factors in red that pop up. We don't know the function of those. We don't know if they modify mean sleep time higher or lower. We don't know that if it even that mean sleep time is a marker for something else, like cardiovascular. But we know that there are lots and lots of different interactions and polymorphisms that make you, that could make you change or prefer your particular preference for your mean sleep time, being an owl or being a lark. Now, do these things change with expression, with age? Sure. But this is the world that we're in right now in terms of trying to explain genotypically what this mean sleep period is. But there are non-genetic modifiers. And they do so because light comes in and resets your supercosmic nucleus. It resets your melatonin. And I'm going to give you two examples. One is going to be, these are two cultures, very similar, two groups of people, very similar genetically, living in rural, well, really remote Argentina. But one with electricity and one one without in November. So you've got the same season, but all you have is the access to electricity. And what you have here is you have a period of time. Now their circadian rhythm is similar, but they have a period of time here where when sunset occurs, this group without electricity fairly rapidly decides to go to sleep. And the one with electricity has a delay. They have a shorter sleep period. Now, I don't think it's iPads. I don't think it's cell phones, because that was not the purpose. They have very remote from this. But this is the effect of electricity on a particular group of people and how it changes not their circadian rhythm, but their sleep time. So there are certain cues that we take to be able to go to sleep. The second example is a pretty interesting one that takes in the red box is our present day Westerners. That is, we all say, well, we want to go to sleep at 11 o'clock at night and wake up at 7 in the morning, and that's it. I want a pill to put me asleep. I want a pill to wake me up. I want this, that, and the other. I want this. Doc, why can't I sleep like everybody else? So I pull out this and I say, a lot of people, a lot of cultures sleep in different ways. And in this particular instance, you see that the hunter-gatherers out in the middle have a main sleep period in the middle of the night, but they also have another one in the afternoon. That sounds great. That sounds like an afternoon nap. And they plan on that. Is that the siesta? Is that what you have in your cultures that you have in Europe? You have pre-industrial Western Europeans, which would then have a sleep that would be early evening. They'd wake up and they have another sleep. And in Salvador, in some groups, the middle of the night is where you do your political activities, because people are just too busy during the day. They're too much, they sleep communally as well. And villagers here have 4 sleeps a day. So it's not just your temperature profile, it's not just your genes, it's also your circumstances, your environment, and these cultures expect to do this just as much as we expect to go to sleep at 11 and wake up at 8. And they're cultures that have the things that we think mean culture. They have religion, they have ability to communicate, they have language, they're growing, they're not descending into chaos. So we're going to say the circadian sleep disorders here. So circadian rhythm has some give to it. We've seen that. Some people are owls, some are larks, tend to be more alert. They can be shortened to 23 hours or lengthened using light cues and other cues. When Late Night with Johnny Carson came on the TV, there was a whole shift in sleep-wake behavior in this country. And when internet then came to places in which you could have cable 24/7, I remember waking up to the flag at 8 o'clock in the morning and watching the TV turn off at 1 o'clock in the morning when I was growing up. And we didn't have those sorts of enjoyments. Stress itself dampens the rhythm. It doesn't make it as strong, and it seems to shorten or delay sleep a little bit, but doesn't have as much of an effect on the circadian rhythm that you might think. The common phase shifts are jet lag and night shift workers. And when you start to say, well, when are they going to have their change in light, food, and activity? And that's called misalignment. You start misaligning the cues that come in for light. You start misaligning the food. You start misaligning your activity. And guess what? You're in Europe. And that jet lag takes 3, 4, 5 days to sort of get your whole system starting to work. It takes 1 day for each hour of shift that occurs. In Western circadian disorders, if this is the normal sleep is the top, an advanced or the person who would be the lark is one that would go to sleep at 8 and wake up then around 4 a.m. And those people, if they start doing this, they get very distressed because what else is there to do at 4 a.m. in the morning? And they complain to their doctor that they can't sleep, and what does their doctor give them? Sleeping pills. And they're already sleeping a good period of time. They have to take a history about this. Delayed sleep phase is that they go to sleep at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and then sleep until noon. Irregular sleep-wake are those that just really don't have a pattern altogether. And there's non-24, which you've seen advertisements for, which is a person who really does not entrain at all with light and instead has a little bit longer than 24 hours and keeps marching it through. So maybe about 1 week out of every 5 he's sleeping and waking up like everybody else does. Now, if the advanced phase is much more common in older people. You saw the age effects on being a lark. More common in younger people, especially in teenagers, is this delayed phase, this tendency. The irregular sleep pattern is very uncommon. And those, the non-24 is more common in eye-blind people. What that is, people that do not have vision and light that is coming in through their eyes. If they've lost their vision because of their cortex, they're okay because there's that separate light circuit for your supracosmic nucleus. So it's not all blind people, it's just blind people that cannot perceive light dark. And the genetic elements are identified in family studies of both advanced phase and delayed phase. So how do you treat this misalignment? Well, you use the same techniques. You use light and you use melatonin. So normal sleep phase, you have what's called the dim light melatonin onset. The green arrow goes up, and that's about an hour and a half before you're going to go to sleep. And then it comes back down just before you're going to wake up. In the advanced phase, what happens is this dim light melatonin starts earlier, say 6 o'clock in the afternoon, in the afternoon, and you're ready to go to sleep by 8 o'clock. And it goes back down. Now, if you take the advanced phase and you give them light, you can suppress melatonin. So the treatment for these people who are larks or who have this advanced sleep phase is to try to reduce their melatonin level, and by doing that with bright light. And in older people who start to have that tendency, the best been shown is social activity with light, playing cards from about 7:30 to 9:30 at night. It's really that activity. And so it's really as a social activity, engagement activity to delay sleep. Delayed sleep phase, the dim light onset is later and the offset is later. And for that particular approach, use bright light in the morning, which pulls your sleep earlier, and you can use some melatonin 2 hours before bedtime to try to gently pull them back. Now, does that work on a weekend warrior teenager? Probably not. You just have to be aware that they have this tendency for delayed phase. And in the instance of having a delayed phase teenager, the battle should be not when you put them to bed, but when you wake them up and you give them a very bright light when they wake up so that they will be able to go to sleep. That's the battle. Everybody says it's go to sleep. It's 10 o'clock, you got to wake up early on Monday morning. Well, no, the major thing is wake them up early on Saturday and Sunday and then keep them going. Okay. This is another example then of how this happens. This is the idea of wearing sunglasses to be able to bring you forward to go to sleep earlier. So we tell the high school kids they can be really cool, wear their sunglasses from 4 o'clock in the afternoon on so they don't have light, so they bring up their melatonin. And in those people who have a delayed phase, the evening bright phase that we have there. Okay. So here's the summary at this particular point of circadian disorders are examples of a mismatch of circadian rhythm and sleep. These are misalignments. And we call them disorders only if people are distressed by them. I mean, if you say, well, doc, I'm 2 o'clock in the morning and I go to 10 and are you bothered by it? Well, no, I want to sleep like everybody else. Well, the killer question is, well, what do you do at 1 o'clock in the morning? And if they sit there and say, I clean my Mustang, my 1964 Mustang with a Q-tip. And it's really exciting. You go, you just don't do that. You don't do that. And that's a real story of one of the professors here. And that's what they did. Fortunately, they were a professor and all their classes were in the afternoon. The misalignments can be treated by light, dark, and a small dose of melatonin, but not in the long run by sleeping pills. Really, that's really what happens, is that you try to put people asleep before they want to be asleep, or you try to keep them asleep at times in which they don't want to sleep. And probably what we do in medicine is recognize, reflect, and reduce anxiety in these disorders and talk people through it and take them off of medications that they think they need. So I'll take some questions here before we go on to the next phase.
You say what to do for people who get up too early or go to bed too late. What about the common problem of people go to bed on time, they wake up in the middle of the night, and then they have to sleep late?
So there are molecules that put you to sleep, keep you asleep, and wake you up. They get looser as you get older, or they get looser probably as you get stressed, right? But you also have this concept of two sleeps. And if you're distressed by it just because you say, well, I'm not sleeping through the night, then that's one thing. And the workup includes a general medical survey and things of that sort. But the real issue is how much anxiety do you have of waking up in the middle of the night and what that really does. And there's cognitive behavioral therapy is one that talks, is 6 or 7 sessions and tries to get you through that through a combination of factors, including sleep restriction, which would be able to get you through. You say, well, that sounds crazy, but you do a gradual restriction of sleep, and people then increase their sleep need, and then they're able to then retrain themselves to kind of do that. But remember, your expectation is to fall asleep at 11:30 and wake up at 7, and that, there's 2 sleeps. Charles Dickens used to walk the streets of London between 1:30 and 3:30 in the morning thinking about what he wanted to do. So he got up and did something productive. Another question up here.
Does the light that you need to reset your clock, does that have to be a full spectrum light? You should get a special light bulb or a special lamp?
The one that'll keep you up is blue light. And that's the blue light at night and blue blockers to be able to do that. Full spectrum light is good. Now, full spectrum light is hard to get. You can buy these. The full spectrum light bulbs that are fluorescent are the ones you see in car showrooms and dress shops. They are not the ones that you get in your usual, because those cost about $3.75 a bulb, and the usual ones that you have in your workplace cost about $1.75, and they don't produce a full spectrum. And you don't need much to reset. You don't need it all day long. You need 20, 30, but it should be a sufficient brightness to be able to do that. Some people, it's hard because you want to put it in a fixed place. You say, there are architects and interior designers that will design your kitchen and your room for your circadian, to increase your circadian light or your circadian forcing.
And what about the melatonin? What dose is going to work to change?
So the melatonin dose is very low. It's about 0.5 milligrams. It's not a sleeping pill. It's not covered by FDA. There are no tests of this. It makes you go to sleep when you're sleepy, only when you're sleepy. It doesn't put you to sleep. You can take melatonin in the middle of the day, you won't fall asleep. It's really to reset.
How much data is there showing the differences in sleep pattern between women and men?
So in terms of their preference, you saw their general preference for mean sleep time. The data that suggests that there are, and the EEG manifestations are about the same. What happens is that the state changes are different. And so women have more state changes than men, which may mean that they go from stage 1 to stage 2 and back again faster. And these particular points of sleep, now how they sleep and where they sleep, is the most sleep deprived in our culture are those women who have children and work, because they do everything. And that's because they differ in their sleep to men because of men.
What is the state of sleep that people usually dream?
It's a rapid eye movement sleep. But if people are awoken from non-REM sleep, they will have fleeting thoughts. And what they're doing is they're activating their brain because of the arousal system, and it's not coherent. And REM sleep is not. It's an accessing, and it's generally things that people have seen before. It's activating your memories. And then the big question is, a baby that has rapid eye movement sleep, what are they dreaming of? And it's probably not for dreaming. It's for brain development, and that may be for adults as well.
Do mild doses of a stimulant like coffee throw off circadian rhythms?
Coffee is the second largest commodity in the world after oil, and it's really because we would like to have coffee rather than sleep. We're in a sleep-deprived world. It counteracts the adenosine that builds up with sleep. That's one of the factors that builds up with sleep the longer you are awake.
I'd appreciate if you comment on possible differences between internally produced and externally derived melatonin, that is, if you take it externally versus you're producing it. And secondly, in looking at a lot of reports of the effect of melatonin, the striking thing to me is the externally administered melatonin is the enormous range in data that people seem to have from almost no improvement in sleep to big effects. And thirdly, I read an article recently that was recently published. It was a double-blind prospective study that showed that melatonin increased sleep slightly, but interestingly, if you used time-release melatonin, you got a drop in systolic blood pressure during the night. I thought that was kind of interesting.
3 questions there. First, the melatonin itself has 2 receptors, M1 and M2. They're being exploited as antidepressants. They're being exploited by other things. The affinities of these things are fairly small, hence the need for just small doses to reset things. And the larger doses really come about and have not been studied for dose effects in large populations, mainly because it's not proprietary and the sorts of things that are there. In terms of the released melatonin, the blood pressure normally falls during sleep, and sleep is generally cardioprotective. And the longer you sleep, the blood pressure fall will be there. And I've read that report that the blood pressure fall occurs, but it normally does. It probably won't be used as an antihypertensive, but it has that. But a lot of other drugs affect sleep that also affect your blood pressure. Beta blockers are one that inhibit melatonin and also lower blood pressure even more during sleep. So your circadian rhythm is working there in that.
We hope you've been enjoying the Origin Science Scholars Program with Dr. Kingman Stroll. Dr. Stroll is Program Director of Sleep Medicine at University Hospital's Cleveland Medical Center, Professor of Medicine at Case Western Reserve University, and a Fellow of the Institute for the Science of Origins. In the second part of our talk, we learned about misalignments between circadian rhythm and sleep, and how they can be adjusted using light and dark, and melatonin. In our final segment, Dr. Stroll will talk about the effects of sleep disorders on our lives, and specifically our health. Now, back to our talk.
So I want to talk about circadian life, and I really want you to reflect a little bit about how circadian rhythm really is all around you and what you do, and you swim in a circadian world. One of these things is, the first thing I'll talk about is, you've seen this before, this is mean relative performance of eye-hand coordination. And this is hours of wakefulness for 29 hours. And so after around 17 hours, there becomes a dip that's detectable and significant. And then it goes down to about 24, 25 hours and comes back up. Why does it come back up? Circadian vigilance, right? So now you're recognizing these things. But the important part here, and important in terms of thinking about medical training, is at 17 hours or so, you start getting to the levels which equivalent degree of impairment that comes from alcohol. So the concept is that sleep loss, and certainly volitional sleep loss, or even sleep loss that is brought about by, why don't you work the second shift, or let's work for 24 hours, or this sort of thing, is really, it starts to put people in a position in which they may be just as impaired as people who who you would not want to have on the road. And so one of this particular data and other data have now had that interns at least can't be on for more than 18 hours their first year. Now, why not second and third year? Well, the older docs all say, well, that would be expensive. That's always the answer. You got to hire more people. That's the first answer. And the second one is, well, they learn how to handle it. And I'm not sure if that's true either. But those are the sorts of things that that plays out. Now, what's the other area in which this might be important? Oh, driving risk. So, and why we have traffic jams is circadian rhythm, right? All right. So your risk for drowsy driving in general is any sedating medications or small amounts of alcohol, distances driving alone or long distances. Groups, males 18 to 28 are the highest group, mainly because they're risk takers and they're often the ones that have our delayed phase and have shorter sleep. Shift workers and having an untreated sleep disorder. So how does this play out? Well, here's an example of the number of fatigue-related traffic accidents over a 24-hour period, and this is time of day, goes from midnight to midnight. And is it randomly distributed throughout the 24-hour period? No, it's not. Does it have peaks and valleys? Yes. Now, these are hard statistics to get, or were hard, until they realized that you had the opportunity to check as a policeman fatigue, but you couldn't check whether or not they were sleep deprived. Now, most officers knew when people were sleep deprived, how they were driving, that it was different from when they were drunk driving, because they run off the road right or they run off the road left, and they don't make evasive actions. So these are really traffic accidents that could be defined as differently. Now, the second thing is that this is not the pattern, really, of alcohol. It's really a pattern of fatigue. So what does this map to? It maps to circadian rhythm. And these evening is the evening dip that people have in their temperature and their activity. That is when their vigilance is reduced. And the mid-afternoon decline or increase in traffic activity is that mid-afternoon dip in vigilance that occurs with the intersection of vigilance has not increased very much, but sleepiness has. Now, that's well and good, but it differs according to age. So these are age groups, less than 25, 26 to 48, 46 to 65, and over the age of 65. And the patterns in the younger age groups are similar to what I just showed you. Pattern at age 46 to 65 is a little bit less. Now, there's debate on why it's less at night. Is it because by age 46, everyone has had a period of time in which they've had a time in which they've nearly fallen asleep while driving and they're scared to death to do it again? Or is it some other factor? But then you get into the age greater than 65, in which most of them are happening in the afternoon. And the answer to that is they don't drive at night. But the idea is, so you have to have the opportunity to have a fatigue related. You have to have opportunity. But it's interesting how this all sort of plays out. The other thing to notice is that the number, that is that top number on the y-axis, is 250 for the age that's per crashes, and this is number of crashes for, I think it's 10,000 people, and this is less than age 25, whereas it's down to like 40 in greater than 65. So the difference is much higher in that earlier age group that we talked about. Here's one relevant to one of the studies that drove changes in hours for residents. So this is average daily hours of sleep divided into less than less than 4, 5 to 6, and greater than 7 hours of sleep. And there are three things: weight gain, use of alerting medications, and drinking alcohol. Now, the weight gain you heard a little bit about. That is, last week you heard about weight gain in circadian rhythm. So if you're not sleeping, you're eating, and so the weight gain is explained by the opportunity to eat. The use of alerting agents could be for the same reason, and the drinking alcohol is interesting because alcohol does have a stimulating effect initially, and then it has a sedating effect, but the stimulating effect is there. So what you can see is this general middle ground is what they took, because 5 to 6 hours of sleep times 7 is 42. If you have an 80-hour work week and you put 42 hours on top of that, it's 120. And then you have 168 hours there, leaving you about 40 hours to do everything else you want to do at age 24 to 32. With a family, with 2 kids, whatever it is that we have to do. Now, I bring this up here that sleep is not uniform across the ages. Most of the things I've talked about have been in this age group of about over 30 to less than 50. That when you're a child, your sleep is 16 out of 24 hours when you're born in the first few months of life. And it goes down rapidly to age 4 to 7. The amount of REM sleep is extremely high early life and gets reduced. The amount of non-REM sleep proportionally doesn't change very much compared to the amount of REM sleep. And as age goes on, the amount of sleep is less. Now, there are very few samples in this over the age of 70, because this is one in which, and we have not done all the sorts of things that you would want to do, which is this reaction time, because your brain is changing. Does sleep deprivation affect an older brain more than it does a younger brain? is it have these medications that are alerting or sedating affect things differently. The interesting thing to think about is a dose of Benadryl at 25 milligrams. If you've slept for 8 hours for the last four days, you will hardly have any impact on your vigilance. But if you slept for 4 hours for 4 days, that same dose will impair your vigilance, impair your driving ability. Likewise, if you have 8 hours of sleep a night for 4 days, and I give you caffeinated coffee and decaffeinated coffee, you can't tell the difference. But if you have 4 hours of sleep a night, you can. You immediately, and also your behavior in terms of reaction time is much. So the same dose of a medication, it's either alerting or sedating, has different effects according to how much sleep you've had for the last 4 to 6 nights. School performance. We have this thing about school start times. This is an argument here. The delay in sleep onset occurs at puberty. That is, that night owl sort of tendency increases in 12, 14, 16-year-olds. Teenager is a night owl. A delay in school start time, and this is about 6 different places in Minneapolis, improved grade point average. That's pretty interesting. There is a biology in health, is that things like myocardial ischemic episodes, infarctions, sudden cardiac deaths, and ischemic strokes, more common before noon, during the time in which your sleep is been satiated and you have an increase in your vigilance level. And there's also a dip, a rise in myocardial infarctions in the mid-afternoon as well, when that circadian rhythm still starts to rise. What do we mitigate this with? Light sources and fire. Imagine you were 250,000 years ago and you didn't have a fire, didn't have a light. What would you do? You'd go in and you probably have 2 sleeps, maybe even 3 sleeps. Be able to do things that way. So fire sleep could be prolonged on the ground, setting a stage for communal structures. They use candles, gas street lighting. I like the example of the Chicago World's Fair, the first time they used lighting of buildings, and that was as an architectural feature. And so and now we have LED lights that do the same or do similar things. We also now have a sleep workout room, right? We have the pillow. We have technology. Standalone bedroom is an invention of the 17th century because people could now afford to have that. The bed is a comfort design product. Look at all the different types of beds you have. And then the clock radio, the TV, the coffee maker, the computer, the dogs and the cats, and everything else that sort of gets put into this particular room when you sleep. Our particular phrases that we have for sleep, miles to go before we sleep. You have particular rituals, cleaning, grooming, making love, reading, speaking, clothing. What do we wear, if anything? These are all culturally and socially determined. But never get caught napping. So it's a circadian world. We sleep about an hour or so less than we did in 1990. I don't think our genes have changed, but that's what we plan on doing. After oil, coffee is the second largest commodity. And I think about public housing and policy have no inherent circadian or sleep agenda. They have it for parking, they have it for garbage, and they have it for sort of various things, but not how do you get a community to have circadian changes, safeness, light, and things of that sort. So there we are in Cleveland. This is the United States in the middle of the night, and Cleveland is a pretty bright light in the middle of that. And my goal then has been to elevate circadian sleep to the same level as nutrition and exercise. And you've had nutrition and exercise when you were in school, but you didn't have sleep or circadian rhythm. And so I want to acknowledge the origins, science of origins, and various people that helped me kind of do this talk. And this is hopefully what we won't do to the Earth in the future. Thank you very much.
The Origin Science Scholars Lectures are presented by Case Western Reserve University's Institute for the Science of Origins, with the assistance of the Siegel Lifelong Learning Program, the College of Arts and Sciences, and MediaVision. For more information on the Origin Science Scholars Program, including a full video archive, please visit the Institute's website at origins.case.edu.